Hey, there you are.
Hello.
Hey, Christopher, thank you so much for your time and for joining me on this episode. I'm really excited to get to talk to you about all things poetry, and I was checking out your bio, and I'm just really excited to talk to another fellow Mexican American, especially in the creative field. So I'm really excited to see what's been going on with you. Did your family have ties to creativity? Was it a fairly open environment to creativity?
It was an open environment to creativity, but to be frank, no one in our family, at least in terms of my parents,
Mm,
um, were really creative types. I
mm,
mean, the farthest it went is that my father knew how to play the guitar, but he didn't want to be a musician.
mm,
I think at one point he wanted to be a soccer player instead. In terms of creativity, they were open to the idea of creativity, which is to say that just out of nowhere, their children want to be creative. My brother wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a writer and an actor. And I think my younger sister also had an interest in music.
mm.
So there's four of us, by the way,
Oh,
two
okay.
older brothers, including myself, and two younger sisters. And yeah, for some reason, the arts really exploded within our generation as opposed to my parents. My
Mm,
parents weren't really creative types.
mm. What part of Mexico are your parents from?
Del DF.
DF. Oh, okay. I was gonna say if we were neighbors. My family's from Jalisco. Have you been back there? Do you have ties to Mexico down there?
I used to go there every summer when I was
Mm,
a kid. But
yeah.
unfortunately, as soon as I started college, I had to start working to pay off my loans. I would either had summer jobs or summer
Mm,
classes, and I actually haven't been back to Mexico for about 12 years now,
oh man. Yeah.
and that really saddens me actually because I got to know my grandparents as a child, and they're all actually gone now.
Mm,
I wasn't able to say goodbye to them because I always had to keep working or I had to keep studying,
yeah.
and you know, I
Oh.
love something that really bugs me is when people make traveling a personality trait. That's not a personality trait. That's a class indicator.
I mean, yeah, and it's difficult, for some of us who we don't have the luxury to be able to see our loved ones. I mean, I haven't been to Mexico in about 5 years, and haven't seen my dad in a while. He's actually retired in Mexico, and so that's one of those things where you feel like there are certainly different experiences being lived by different classes, and travel is one of those things that really becomes an emotional subject for me. But in terms of your writing, getting started with that, how did that come about for you when you were younger? When did that start for you?
It came about rather organically, and by that I mean that I discovered it and it discovered me because for better or worse, I was not the best reader as a kid. Like I would read comics and manga, but in terms of like novels, like actual text, I would only read if it was form of the dialogue bubble in one of those comics.
Mm,
So I was actually a really bad reader as a kid. I thought I was going to go into video game design actually.
mm,
Then I suddenly started something clicked in me during my junior year of high school, and I read some um, some novels that really struck me, specifically in a Spanish literature class where I
mm,
got to read books by Latin American greats such as Marquez, such as Isabel Allende, such as Julio Cortázar and Juan Rulfo, and it just really changed my life. It started to really give me a view of like what novels can do, um, and specifically what stories can do. So I did that, but then the reason why I started writing poetry was because of none other than Pablo Neruda,
mm.
who I also read in that class. And I was just a very sad teenage romantic. And the fact that he wrote such very sad teenage romantic poems really struck with me.
Mm,
So I was a very terrible Pablo Neruda imitator for a while until I started to discover more contemporary poets.
mm,
Um, but in terms of poetry specifically, I did not actually write much poetry until I went to my MFA in writing at the University of San Francisco.
mm.
And I only took one poetry class there, which I was shocked I was going to do because, you're thinking to yourself, oh, I'm a novelist or I'm a short story writer. I'm not a poet. Like I don't know how to do poetry.
Mm,
But then that got me thinking, you know what? That's not the point of a class. You know, you
mm,
don't go into a calculus class thinking you're already a calculus genius. You go in there to learn calculus.
right.
So in the same way, I went in there to learn about poetry, and my God, did it change my perspective on poetry.
What what happened in the class, and specifically, what are the things that were sort of eureka moments for you at that time?
Well, it was mostly reading a lot of poetic theory.
Okay.
The name of the class was called Poetics, and it was through my brilliant instructor, Bryn Saito. So lots of I have to give her thanks for making the class so amazing and so life changing. Um, but it was a bunch of theory on poetry. Like one of our final assignments was to study like some sort of poetic theory and present it to the class. And for me, I did spoken word poetry
Okay.
um, and and political poetry, which was an okay presentation in hindsight. But it was just that's kind of the kind of stuff we would talk about. It's be about like the purpose of poetry, and not only that, but it was introducing me to contemporary poets
Mm,
such as Soma Sarif and Danez Smith and Douglas Manuel, and it was just a lot of people who, you know, I think when people say that nobody reads poetry anymore, I
mm.
think they're mostly referring to the old white dead men. Um, nobody people read Shakespeare in classes, but nobody really reads words for fun. They
Mhm.
could,
Yeah.
but I have seen poetry like experience the Renaissance, particularly during the Trump era, because of politics.
Mm,
Protest poetry, poetry by LGBTQ community, poetry by poets of color.
mhm.
It. I mean, we still have obviously white poets who get published the most. Don't get me started on that. um, but there was this renaissance in poetry because of what was going on in the country.
Mm.
And not only that, but I also suspect that the whole nobody reads poetry anymore is an American attitude
Oh, interesting.
because there are a lot of countries where poets are jailed, for
Mhm.
speaking out against their governments. So, but here we just ignore them more than anything. Just say,
Mm.
oh, no one's going to read them. It doesn't matter,
Yeah. Do you think it's because, at least from my perspective, do you think poetry has moved online mostly? Like a majority of that communication is happening online, or do you think there is still a foundation for poetry in the offline world?
Oh yeah, totally, totally for the offline world, but also for the online world. I mean, I know there's a term insta poetry, which people have extremely mixed feelings of,
Mm,
myself included. But in terms of the renaissance of poetry that I was talking about, it also included a lot of people who are young, a lot of the youth who
mhm,
started to read poetry because they felt empowered to write poetry. And they felt empowered to write poetry because of social media, because they could post it there, get clicks and views and reads, and get feedback for it.
mhm,
Whereas, they could try for years and years to submit it to literary journals and be rejected every time. Um, because guess who's also in charge of those literary journals,
So,
right?
yeah, yeah, there is a community of gatekeeping, would you say? Is that something that is still keeping folks outside of that industry, or do we just have to take it upon ourselves to create our own avenues? Do you think that's more possible now than uh, getting these larger publication entities to start looking for the outsiders?
In terms of the gatekeeping, I think the gatekeeping is always going to exist for better or worse. But in terms of the making things through our own avenues, yeah, that's definitely possible now. There's self-publishing. There's a lot of people I know have published chapbooks on
Mhm,
their own, um, and then sell them independently, which is pretty cool. Um, but I'm also seeing more and more literary journals, like you say, popping up online,
mhm,
and these are mostly by people who want to do it for the love of labor. They can't pay you, but they give you much more exposure because they really want to champion your work.
mhm,
So in terms of to go back to the online thing, I have also noticed that it's not just poetry that's moving online; it's a community.
mm,
Like Like, because writing is such a lonely endeavor, I think we naturally want to reach out to people who understand writers, and nobody understands writers better than writers, right? Nobody understands poets better than poets. You can talk about these kind of things with a musician. I know, I've tried with my brother, but he just won't get it.
So, on your bio, it said, writer, bookseller, former fiction editor. I kind of wanted to ask you about fiction editing. What does that entail, and where did that take place?
that was that was probably one of the funnest things I had ever done as a side project.
Mhm,
Which I wish it could have been my main project, but as far as I can tell, the magazine that I was working for called Watermelon
mhm.
Mag has taken a hiatus that I don't think it's going to recover from.
Oh,
But that's besides the point.
mm,
At first, I started there as a contributor. I contributed my own personal essays and nonfiction to it, and then one day they opened up positions for editors.
mm.
Ironically enough, I applied for the poetry editor, but I was given the fiction editor position. I guess because I'm better at fiction. I'm not sure.
Mm.
Um, but but in terms of what I did there, basically people would submit. I would read the submissions, and I would get to choose which ones went into the magazine and which ones did not.
Mm.
Um,
Quite a
Now, of
task.
course, if I it was really quite a task because I started to see it from the other way around. I saw that, oh, I can't just publish everyone because not everyone's going to be a good fit.
Mm.
Um, and that's not because their work is terrible. It's just that this isn't really what we're looking for. You know,
Right.
we like to think of our. I know that poets and writers like to think that their work can belong anywhere, but having been in the shoes of an editor and having been contributors and staff writers for other smaller publications, I just know that's not how it works.
Right.
Basic, Basically, it needs to find a home, which it will, but it needs to find the right home. And now, does that mean I rejected a lot of people? I think I was one of the most lenient editors ever because I tended to read something and I wouldn't just reject it or accept it outright. I would try to see if it had any sort of potential in terms of like, hey, if I can work with you on this, I think we can get it published or get it ready to have it published. And some writers would say yes, some writers would say no. It's good enough as it is, and then that's when I would make the final decision. So
Moving forward, having gone through that experience, what kind of things can you take from that and apply it to your own writing?
it's helped a lot because that was one of the things that I think that was really tough for me when I was younger in terms of just knowing how the submission process worked, just knowing uh, how much rejecting was just a part of the life of
Yeah.
a writer. And again, it informed me a lot because I was already told through my MFA that sometimes things aren't going to work out with certain magazines because of so and so. Like, for example, you could submit to one magazine that a poem about unicorns, but the problem is that they had already gotten a poem about unicorns and they don't want two. So they're either going to tell you, hey, we can't accept this right now, sorry, or they're going to tell you, hey, we want to accept this, but we got to wait for another issue, et cetera, and so forth. So that way, you don't really beat yourself up anymore in terms of
Mm.
like, no, I'm not good enough. I'm never going to be able to do this. I should just give up and work in an office 9 to 5 every day. But it's much more of a, okay, that one didn't work out. On to the next one.
You know how after looking at so many submissions or so much of one thing that you might start to see things that make the writing effective. Do you feel like you've started to recognize those things within the submissions?
There's definitely like good writing in terms of like, you get the grammar right, or you get the structure right, you get all of it right. But what I was really looking for in um in a lot of the stories that were submitted was emotional impact.
Mm,
Like, is this going to be not necessarily a story that changes not the way not the way I see things, not the way I not the way I think, but simply the way I feel. Like, did you really manage to get me connected to these characters, or to the story? Did you really make me care about what was happening? Not necessarily root for it, because if it's a story on murder, I don't want to root for it,
Mhm.
obviously. Um, but did you really have me caring like what's happening here?
Right. Do you think that, at this point in time in your creative pursuits, are you leaning more towards poetry or fiction? Or is it just a balancing act at this point?
It really is a balancing act. I'm not leaning more towards one or the other because I'm also in Los Angeles and thus doing screenwriting.
Mm,
Um, so honestly,
very
like,
nice.
yeah, I'm a man of all trades for better or worse, which can sometimes be for the worst because then you're sitting at the computer and be like, which one am I working on today? I have this one or that one or that one or that one.
Are there some, screenwriting projects that you're excited about right now? Or things that
Oh yeah,
you're
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'm actually currently applying for a TV fellowship
Mm,
by the NHMC. Um, has to do with script writing. I highly recommend anybody who's a Latin identified screenwriter to apply to it. Um, it's I almost got in the last time I applied, which was in 2019,
mm,
and I've been working on a screenplay with a friend of mine. And having edited so much, I'm going to use that as a writing sample. And you know,
very cool.
I think I might have a shot. So
No, that's amazing. I wish you the best on that one, and, if you like, we'll let folks know in the, episode description too if anyone's interested in that, but what kinda genre do you like to focus on when you're writing screenplays, or is that kind of an open canvas too?
it's a bit of an open canvas, but lately it's been a lot of slice of life stories. So
Mm,
like realistic stories, not necessarily drama, not necessarily um, romance or anything like that. But it really just the slice of life stories about real life,
mhm,
particularly for better or worse, my own experiences.
mhm.
Um, so
Well, yeah, I mean, I imagine that growing up in California, it's just it seems like such a foreign world to me. I'm actually a Mexican American who was raised in Wyoming, the state of Wyoming of all places, and so
oh,
I'm very intrigued by what the Mexican American experience has been in other parts of the country because it's so specific, right? Just like with anything else. But
hmm,
you mentioned in your bio that you are from Watsonville. Um, can you tell
yes,
me about
representing the Ville.
Can you tell me about what life was like there growing up?
It was very quiet.
Mm,
Um, we are a small agricultural community that is dominated mostly by Latinx and Filipinx people.
mm,
Um, there's a big history behind that. Actually, now that I realize actually a lot of folks of color,
mm,
because there was also a huge moment in history where regarding the Japanese Americans, but a very long history on that town that we can definitely get into later.
mm,
Um, in terms of how it was when I grew up there, it was a very quiet town. We are segregated, low income community. Apart from, we are a part of Santa Cruz County, but we're the mostly PLC dominated Santa Cruz part of Santa Cruz County
mm.
because our neighbors, Aptos and Santa Cruz, the city, are incredibly white and affluent.
I see.
Um, yeah, so it's a very segregated community there. Um,
Were
yeah,
you were
so
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna. Oh, the last thing I was gonna say is that because it's very segregated, there wasn't really many career opportunities there.
Mm,
Like we're Santa Cruz is right below Silicon Valley, so people can commute from there to here, which has caused problems
I
with
see.
gentrification. Um, yeah, but in terms of like Watsonville itself, it's mostly agricultural and educational.
How old were you when you started to realize that disparity, when you were a kid?
It took me a while. I would visit Santa Cruz from time to time with my family, and I would wonder to myself, why doesn't Watsonville have any of this? And
Uh,
I'm really ashamed to say it, but I was thinking at a very young age, like, why doesn't have the cleaner streets or the nicer businesses or stuff like that? And that's a very shameful way of thinking because, it's not Watsonville's fault
Mhm.
that it's low income.
Right.
Um, it's a segregation of economics and income inequality. So, and I didn't realize that until I was much older in college. In high school, it just seemed very normal. It's like, oh yeah, all the Mexicans here in Watsonville, all the white people over there in Santa Cruz.
Mm. So it was
So
an accepted thing where you said, "Okay, this is my life. This is how we live, and let's not think too much of it then."
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mm. When did you feel that sort of make its way into your writing? Because I imagine that some of the poetry or maybe work that you started doing became political, as you mentioned. Did it have a strain of that in the writing, or when did that happen?
It was also ironically late in the game when I started to think about particularly race and ethnicity in my writing
Mm,
because yes, I was inspired by the Latin American writers in that high school Spanish literature class. However, when I was in college, I think around my third year, I took a class on specifically on one writer of all writers. It was Philip Roth,
oh,
the Jewish American writer who have people have many opinions on, but that's not the point of this story. Um, in this story, I took a class devoted to his writing, and I saw how he wrote so much about his Jewish American identity
mm.
and ethnicity. And then I looked over all of my writing, and plot twist, they were all white characters.
Oh, really?
Like every single story I had written at that point included white men, white women. It was all white characters with white names and white problems. And I thought to myself, why
That is
is it
so.
like this?
Yeah. Wow.
It was actually kind of scary when I found out, and I realized it's because I'd never actually seen myself represented in those stories, and I thought that it's a bit of a brainwashing, whitewashing sort of thing that great literature is one of the white greats. It's
Wow.
like,
That
um, yeah,
I empathize with that so much. I can't even begin to describe it. As I mentioned, growing up in a primarily white community of 13,000 people, a majority of them Latter-day Saints, I definitely can't imagine actually just realizing, "Why am I writing this? Why am I
hmm
denying my own experience over things that maybe I've never really experienced?" But it's almost like in the back of our mind, there's something telling us this is the approved way of doing something, right? This is the
that's
approved way.
exactly how it is.
Yeah, so what did you have to do to break out of that, to let go of that?
Well, it wasn't easy. That was for damn sure. Um, I started to think more and more about my experiences. Ironically, thanks to that class, who people ironically tend to link Philip Roth as a white writer, but again, that's besides the point
Mhm.
of this story. But the point is that I started to write more and more about Mexican American characters, particularly based on my experiences. But then I started to have this sort of like imposter syndrome moments where I thinking to myself, who's going to publish this?
Yeah,
Who's actually going to produce this? Who, if it's a lot of white gatekeeping, who's actually going to want to put this out for me
yeah.
or bring it to life for me? Or, yeah,
And that's the dilemma, right? Because then you might start wanting to make concessions about something to say, well, maybe if we have a percentage of brown people in the story, then it might be a little bit more acceptable, or I might be able to get in, and get it under the radar. Do you ever feel like you automatically start making those concessions in your writing?
oh, yeah, oh,
Mm,
yeah, 100%.
yeah.
Especially because I really like how you mentioned about the American experience being so different in other parts of the country because that's
Yeah.
exactly how it is everywhere. It's
Mhm.
nuanced.
Yeah.
Um, you know, in Watsonville, the Mexican American experience was mostly farm working.
Mm,
A lot of I grew up with knowing a lot of people who worked in the fields, and I worked in the fields
mhm.
from time to time.
Yeah.
So, um, whereas in other places, apparently a lot of American media
Mm,
tends to think we're drug traffickers.
Yeah, right,
A lot of us
right.
tend to view us as janitors, custodians, just the low, meager jobs
Mhm.
that people obviously don't want to work. And
Yeah,
let's say nobody wants to work anymore.
yeah. I mean, I got a question for you because this reminds me of something that I've been thinking about in my own writing. I come from a lower to working class family. My dad was a construction worker, laborer, musician, jack of all trades kind of thing. My mom has always been she was a hairdresser and, a housekeeper. She that's just what she did, who she was. And a lot of the people in my life have been in those positions forever and ever. So, this is the
Hmm.
dilemma. I always think I want to write about my experiences. I wanna write about my family or the people that I know, not so much as archetypes, but just as human beings, right? And the struggles that they've gone through in a way to honor them. But at the same time, there's this larger conversation that's saying you have to have people of color who are heroes, who are in positions of power, who are, leading the way, right? So that we can teach newer generations that it's possible to achieve something other than, what we've seen before. So, how do we reconcile that? What's the answer here? Because I think a lot of us do come from that background where, there is sort of a working class um kind of history that we want to represent, but is that wrong? And should we create these characters that are larger than life and these people of color who can be heroes?
Yeah, I mean, you're right that there's a lot of us do come from those sort of backgrounds, myself included. My mom ran a daycare at home,
Mhm,
and my dad is a social worker.
mhm,
But of course, they had to work their way up even to those positions.
right.
But it again, it goes back to the whole thing being nuanced because there's a reason why a lot of positions start out that way is because of poverty, immigration, and white supremacy. Um, those are there are circumstances that forces them into those situations in which they work those meager jobs so then that their children basically they walk so their children can run, you
Right.
know
Yeah.
so then they expect their children to rise above the ranks, get the grades, go to college, and get the good jobs and be in those positions of power.
Mhm.
And yes, it's something we do want to see, but there's also a lot of gatekeeping even within those positions of power. You just saw how um, for
Ye
the confirmation of our
Oh,
newest
yeah.
Supreme Court justice,
A bit infuriating
how
if you ask
that
me.
ended up.
Yeah. Uh,
Which, which congrats to her
I mean, she
for
was an
being confirmed
absolute
as the
boss.
justice. But you did see how.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, totally, totally, 100%. She was sincerely overqualified, given every other person who has been there this
Right,
whole time,
right.
including three of Trump's Supreme Court justices. So she was much more qualified than any of those justices combined.
Mhm.
Um, Regardless, you saw how the Senate just walked out.
Right.
So you have people in positions of power who look like us, and that people just won't accept.
So, do you think that we can use our art, our stories, our projects to bring a different kind of awareness about who we are? Should that be the priority, for us as storytellers to or is it a responsibility to paint a picture of who we are, um, for them to see a different side of us? Or is that even something we should be thinking about?
So that is a very tough conversation to have,
Mhm,
specifically because there are people who do believe that it's the poet's, you know, responsibility to bring awareness to the world.
mhm.
I don't necessarily think it's their responsibility, but I think it is in their power to
Mm,
do that
yeah.
because and this be just my personal theory on art in particular is that we should write for to express ourselves, and that in turn could bring awareness to the stories that we're telling.
Mm,
And just to go into a little bit of a caveat, I used to volunteer as a screenwriter for a screenwriting instructor at a nonprofit called the Digital Nest, also located in Watsonville.
Oh,
Um, and I was volunteer as a screenwriter instructor for the youth there, for high school and college students.
oh, cool.
And yeah, it was really cool. And one of the things I would always tell them is that, look, so they always tell you how hard it is to be an artist, but they never tell you how hard it is not to be an artist. You know, like imagine going to your 9 to 5. First of all, you wake up in the morning, you get up very early because you have to commute to your work on time, or at least wake up on time for your computer now that we're doing things remotely. Um, and you eat breakfast, you get up, you go to work. Even if you enjoy your work, you're still there for 8 hours straight, all
Hmm.
day. You go home, you have to make some food, have dinner, and then you have to go to bed so that you get to work on time the next day. So basically, rinse and repeat. Um, so I sincerely asked every student that was there every time I mentioned this, where is your outlet? You know, how
Mm.
do you let people know exactly what you're feeling, how you're feeling, and what you want to feel? You know, how do you let it all out in a healthy manner? So, in terms of like the purpose of poetry, purpose of art, that's my personal theory for it, which in turn could bring about change because we have our
Hmm.
own stories to tell, and each story is different.
Right.
And sometimes when we tell those stories and people hear them, you get different reactions. But you could also get a collective reaction, which is that, hey, this person has really suffered. That's really wrong. So, and I think that, and I think that is very powerful. You know, you
Right.
weren't trying to change the world, but you changed the world anyway.
Mm. Well, that's yeah. I mean, I completely agree. First of all, I think it's amazing that you did the screenwriting instructor volunteer work. It's pretty great that you brought that to your community. Do you have any moments during that time that really changed your perspective on something, or that taught you something during your time as a volunteer screenwriting instructor?
Yeah, I mean, for the better or worse, I just kept hearing the question, "Do I have to move to LA?"
Mm.
And for better or worse, my short answer eventually, definitively became maybe. And for that, I mean, yeah, I mean, it was first a no. I was like, no, you can write wherever you want. But then it started to quickly shift into a yes because I mean, look where I am right now.
Yeah.
I am in Los Angeles myself, trying to pursue a writing career, and of course, I'm writing in all trades. But when it comes to screenwriting, I think you really do have to be in a place that will be looking to produce your scripts. But now it becomes a maybe, simply because because you could definitely build things in your community um, to create art there. Like even in Watsonville, there's the Watsonville Film Festival now that really does
Oh,
bring
really?
a lot of films from local filmmakers in there. Yeah, I think I don't know what number of the year they just celebrated, but it was a big anniversary. And a few of my friends actually submitted their films to it and got recognized, which was really, really cool. But that wouldn't have happened years before, you
Hmm.
know? Without that wouldn't have happened without a collective sense of community to bring change and art to the people around you, to your
Yeah.
city, to your small town. Um, that said, it can only go so far because Los Angeles is, for better or worse, the capital of a lot of art and filmmaking. So that's why I said maybe,
Right.
because it really depends on how far you want to go. Because as much as I love Watsonville, and I really, really do love Watsonville, one of the reasons I moved out of there is because the resources were so low.
Mhm.
And honestly, it was uh, I just I just can't live a quiet life anymore. Um,
I see.
I tried moving back there just recently, but then I moved back to Los Angeles because I just realized that I'm more of a big city person now.
Is that right?
I have, yeah, I've grown out of that world for better or worse. So
Mhm. Very interesting. So, given that that you are living in the city there and pursuing these things, which I applaud you for, I'm curious about how your schedule pans out with the obviously commutes and work and things that you got to do. How does writing take place for you? When and how do you make time for that, if I may?
every day I have off from work. Um, and for better or worse, I have no choice.
Mhm.
Now, I can definitely take a break, like say, like, oh, today I don't want to write. I'm just gonna read or go on a hike or hang out with friends. So I could definitely make time for other things. But I do realize that my time with my writing is limited because I do work 40-hour work week,
Yeah.
and so I do need to have a balancing act there as well. And I kind of need those 40 hours because I'm a bookseller, and bookselling does not pay you that much.
Mm, I
So
see.
um, yeah, so I am um, I am being cautious about like not skipping any days of work and making sure that I have enough money for the rent, for
Uh-huh.
groceries, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But this is still what I want to pursue. I did move back to Los Angeles to finish what I started.
Mm,
And if I can make a declaration here, I will finish what I started. I will
that's
get those
right.
scripts done. I will get those books out, all the
Like a
things.
like a boss, like a boss.
Like a
So,
boss.
in terms of your book selling, what does that entail for you? What's, where are you doing that at?
I work at a Barnes and Noble over in Studio City.
Ah, nice.
Um, which is a lot of fun. Actually, I I really like the job.
Mm,
Um, I
yeah.
really do like the job because I'm not selling cars. I'm selling books. I'm really passionate about books.
Right,
And
right.
I wanted to be a teacher at one point, and have like intellectual conversations, enlightening moments with students. But it's actually at the bookstore where I meet people who want to read, who are looking for books,
Yeah.
that I have the conversations I thought I was going to have as a teacher. Instead, as a teacher, I started to say to get a lot of students who just didn't want to learn, and that's fine,
Mhm.
because that's
Yeah.
how the American education system works. It disappoints you. Um,
Yeah.
but in terms of these in terms of this job is yeah, I really like it a lot. Um, I will say that at the end of the day, though, it is still retail. Like it
Mhm.
is still a lot of customer service,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
really is a different sort of customer service. Again, I'm not selling cars, and I'm not bringing you.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
there
I'm
seem
not
to
a
be Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm not working food service or
That's right,
anything like
and
that. I'm working with bugs.
that's a tough gig, working food service, but at least you're in a place where you have your inspiration there, you're surrounded by inspiration, and, maybe you're able to pick up on some stories there too, with, the interesting people that you meet. Is that a source of inspiration for you? Just kinda listening and
Oh yeah.
being around people?
Oh yeah, definitely. Actually, more than that, I get to meet other people who want to do the same thing that I do, which
Mm,
is write
yeah,
and act and
yeah.
all the creative things, um, which is inspiring. I actually, if anybody ever comes to visit, I actually set up a table with a lot of writing books. And, people have opinion on the writing books. It's like, oh, why do you need a book to write? Oh, well, why do you need a book to act or a
Right.
book to write music? But that's besides the point. The point is that I set up that table to help other writers find ways to improve their writing. And every
Mhm.
time somebody buys something off that table, I get into a conversation with them. And sometimes we even exchange contact info. And that's how I meet a lot of really, really cool, ambitious people.
Mm.
And that did not happen to me in Watsonville. I actually grew up, and I'm not joking, like I grew up without writers in my life. A
Mhm.
lot of my friends in the past wanted to be musicians,
Mhm.
and I just could identify with that.
Right.
I tried to identify with that. I tried to be a musician myself at one point, but then it just became clear and clear that no, I'm a writer,
Yeah.
and I need to meet other writers, and that's what I'm doing here. So
No, it sounds like an amazing place to be. But I really appreciate that because you understand that there's a need for community. There's a need to reach out and not be isolated, right? Because I think a lot of us tend to go inward and maybe too inward to the
Mhm.
point where we forget how to be around people who will set the flame alight again in some respects. But do you remember having a mentor in your life after you left Watsonville, or somebody who inspired you to pursue the craft even further?
Mentor is a really tough word for me. Mostly because I've had teachers, but I don't think I've had a mentor who I constantly go to for advice.
Mhm,
Um, Now I've had really, really good teachers. Um, Regardless,
mhm,
there was the creative writing supervisor back in my hometown. His name was James Lucas.
mhm,
Um, then there was my MFA thesis advisor, who I love to death. Her name was Beth Lynn, back at the MFA in San Francisco.
mhm.
Um, so I've had teachers throughout my life, but in terms of a mentor that that has that I go to constantly, I don't really have that. I feel like I had to
Mhm.
figure a lot of things out on my own, for better or
Yeah,
worse. Um, so, but hey, look where it's gotten me.
yeah. And I also think it's wonderful too because you have been able to become a mentor to so many people now as, somebody who does work in that setting, like having those conversations and guiding people about books, but also as a screenwriting instructor. I mean, bringing that skill set to your community, I can't imagine the gratification of being able to share what you have acquired, you have gone to find and struggled to get, and bring it back to your people, right? Bring it back to the community where you started. So I really applaud you for that because you in turn have become a mentor in spite of the struggles and things like that. I wanted to ask you one more question because I want to be respectful of your time. I ask everybody this. Why do you think we need the arts now more than ever? Why is it essential that we pursue this in our communities and in our society at large?
Hmm. I think that's the wrong question to ask,
I love
honestly.
it. I love it.
And
Correct
let
me
me
if I'm wrong.
explain. No, no, it's not. It's the thing is that we've heard that a lot very, very recently. Why do we need the arts now more than ever? And I think that is personally the wrong question, wrong way to phrase it, because we've always needed the arts, you know? Um, we don't need the arts now more than ever. We're just expected to do more art now more than ever.
Okay.
Which is this, and I heard that a lot during the Trump administration, is that, oh, we need the arts more than ever. No, we've always needed it. You just weren't really paying attention.
Mm,
Um, we needed it during the Bush administration. We needed it during the deportations of Obama, and we needed it during the fascism of Trump, and now the new do nothingness of Biden.
mm,
Um, so, in at the risk of being canceled, I think the better way to phrase that question is, why do you need the arts more than ever? Not we, because again, we could have different reasons for different forms of art. Some people want to be entertained, some people want to be moved, some people want to protest, other people want to just express themselves. But why do you personally need the arts? And
mm.
why do you personally believe that you need it now more than ever? Why did you think you never needed it before?
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. I appreciate that because you're right. It is not a catch-all question sometimes, if not all the time. So, is there anything else that you'd like to add, Christopher, on craft, thoughts on poetry?
That is also a very tough question because I feel like I have to end on a very good note. And no, but I do feel like we've talked about a lot of the things that we want to talk about. I guess to give people a pet talk, um, or at least the listeners,
Yeah,
give
yeah,
them a
and that's
pep talk. Is that
listen, this is my tragic downfall is I love pep talks, and I think that, I often pursue them at the risk of being reductive. And, you know, because I do think that, a lot of us are dealing with a lot in terms of going to work and pursuing the craft even though, there are barriers, right? Constant barriers. So, what do you ever give yourself pep talks in a way? Do you believe in them?
yeah, I do give myself pep talks.
What would that look like, do you think?
Uh, this is gonna be very, very embarrassing. This is gonna be
No,
very,
it's
very
okay. It's
embarrassing.
okay.
Okay, but basically, I let me put it this way. I misinterpreted the term main character syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term. Apparently, it
I think
originated on
so.
social media, where apparently it means that you think the whole world revolves around you. You know, you basically you're
Mm,
like selfish and narcissistic to the point that you believe yourself to be the main character. I, however, in my anime obsessed mind, believe that it was more like pumping yourself up, like the main character. You know, you're going to overcome
mm,
this. You know, you're going to
yeah.
defeat the villain. It was not that, but I just tend to do that anyway. You know, um, I don't think to myself like, oh, what would Goku or Naruto do? No, I'm more like, I just keep telling myself like, I'm going to conquer this. You know, I'm not going to let it conquer me. Um, it's a very simplistic sort of pep talk, but it
Mm.
seems to work every time.
Wonderful. Well, okay. One last thing, because I know we're running out of time here. Um, do you have some books or poetry that you'd like to recommend that really blew you away the first time you read them? If there's maybe a handful that you really enjoy and have made a difference in your life.
Oh man. I mean, the book that changed my life was Don Quixote by
Mm,
Cervantes. That was one of the books that we were, or at least one of the books that we read from in in the Spanish literature class. Obviously, I did not read. We did not read the whole thing in that class for high schoolers if they did, but I read it on my own time, and yeah, it just that one was one of the big ones that blew me away. 100 Years of Solitude. Um, a lot of the works by Roberto Bolaño.
mm,
He is currently my go-to author, my go-to writer,
okay.
which is to say, like, if I ever need inspiration, if I ever need to be reminded why I want to write, I go to Bolaño. Um, there's also the Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, which is really really cool.
Mm,
Um,
Memory Police.
in terms of poetry, the poems by Solma Sharif are incredible. I just finished the book Time is a Mother by Ocean Vuong, which just came out last Tuesday, which was fantastic. Um,
Mm.
and I think there's just too much to go through in terms of like what I'd want to recommend. You could just check out my Goodreads if you want.
There we go. I'll make sure to link it in the podcast description as well as all the stuff on your link tree. And again, Christopher, thank you so much for your time, for your insights, and for the work that you do. And I'm really looking forward to get to see what you're up to next. And of course, this will be coming out here in the coming week, so I'll make sure that you get the links for that as well. So again, thank you for all that you do, and I hope I get to talk to you soon.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.